You're a loser. You're a coward. You're an animal. May God have mercy on your pathetic soul, because the rest of us who know the truth about you won't." These haunting words come from the relatives of the victims of one of America's most chilling serial killers, the Green River Killer. For 19 long years, Gary Ridgway prowled the streets of Seattle, preying on vulnerable women and leaving a trail of fear and devastation in his wake. It all began in the early 1980s when a man boating along the Green River made a gruesome discovery. At first, he thought it was a mannequin in the water, but as he got closer, he realized it was a body. And not just one, but two bodies lying lifeless under the gentle current. The bodies were identified as Opal Mills and Marcia Chapman, young women who had gone missing from the notorious Strip near SeaTac Airport. This area was known for its transient population and high crime rate, a dangerous place filled with topless bars, cheap motels, and people looking for quick thrills or trying to survive another day. As news of the bodies spread, the King County Sheriff's Office quickly formed the Green River Task Force. A dedicated team of detectives began piecing together the scant evidence left at the scene. They soon realized they were dealing with a methodical and organized serial killer. Over the next few months, more bodies began to surface, all with the same horrifying trademarks: strangulation, sexual assault, and remains discarded in wooded areas or near the river. The victims were often sex workers or runaways, women who lived on the fringes of society. This made the killer's job easier. He preyed on those he believed wouldn't be missed. The public was gripped with fear as the body count rose. By the end of 1982, the bodies of 5 women had been discovered in or near the Green River. Detectives were working around the clock, following every lead, but the killer seemed to always be one step ahead. He left behind little evidence, and the few clues he did leave were often misleading. Cigarette butts and gum wrappers found near the bodies turned out to be red herrings, planted by the killer to throw off investigators. What made this case even more terrifying was the killer's ability to blend into society. Ridgway was a seemingly ordinary man with a job as a truck painter. He had a family and attended church regularly. No one suspected that behind his mild-mannered exterior lurked a predator responsible for the deaths of dozens of women. The community was in a state of panic. Parents kept their children close, and women were afraid to go out alone. The fear was palpable, and the demand for justice grew louder with each passing day. Yet, despite the growing number of victims and the increasing pressure on law enforcement, the Green River Killer remained elusive, his true identity hidden in plain sight. As the task force continued its relentless search for the killer, they turned to unconventional sources for help. In a desperate move, they reached out to one of America's most notorious serial killers, Ted Bundy, who was on death row in Florida. Bundy provided valuable insights into the mind of a serial killer, suggesting that the Green River Killer might be revisiting the bodies to relive his crimes. His advice would later prove crucial in understanding Ridgway's behavior, but for now, the killer remained free, continuing his spree of terror. The discovery of the bodies in the Green River was just the beginning. It set off a chain of events that would span nearly 2 decades, involving one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. The Green River Killer's ability to evade capture for so long is a testament to his cunning and the chilling efficiency with which he carried out his crimes. The story of how he was finally brought to justice is as much about the relentless pursuit of truth as it is about the unimaginable horror inflicted on his victims. As the bodies began to surface, each one told a story of a life tragically cut short. These were not just statistics. They were daughters, sisters, and mothers, each with dreams and loved ones left to mourn their loss. Marcia Chapman was one of the first victims identified. At 31, Marcia was a mother of 3, trying to make ends meet by working as a sex worker. Despite her circumstances, those who knew her described Marcia as kind-hearted and resilient. She was living in a sparsely furnished apartment, doing what she could to provide for her children. Her disappearance left a void in her family that could never be filled. Opal Mills was just 16 years old when she vanished. A young girl with her whole life ahead of her, Opal's future was stolen in the most brutal way. Her body was discovered alongside Marcia's in the Green River. Cynthia Hines, another early victim, was also a young woman trying to survive on the streets. Like many of Ridgway's victims, She came from a troubled background. These women were often runaway teens, escaping abusive homes, and found themselves in the dangerous world of street life. Cynthia's body was found in close proximity to the others, cementing the horrific pattern of a serial killer on the loose. Mary Bridget Meehan was 18 years old and 8.5 months pregnant when she disappeared. Deborah Lorraine Estes, just 15, was another young girl whose life was brutally ended. By the end of 1982, at least 15 girls had either disappeared or been found dead. Each body discovered heightened the community's fear and desperation. Families were left in agony, not knowing if their missing daughters would ever be found, and if found, what horrific state they might be in. Linda Jane Rule was another tragic name on this list. At 16, she was a slender blonde girl with a boyfriend who acted as her pimp. Linda disappeared near the Northgate Mall, another bustling area that masked the dangers lurking within. Her skeletal remains were later found hidden under a bush, a grim reminder of her stolen life. As more bodies were found, the fear and urgency grew. By June 1983, the number of missing or murdered women had risen to 26. The community's terror was palpable, and the pressure on law enforcement was immense. Despite their best efforts, the killer remained elusive, and the body count continued to rise. The investigation began with a flurry of activity. Detectives combed the strip near SeaTac Airport, interviewing sex workers and frequent visitors to the area. They collected tips, sifted through evidence, and followed up on every lead. But the Green River Killer was cunning, leaving little physical evidence behind. One of the first breaks in the case came from a chilling encounter. In the early 1980s, Gary Ridgway was questioned after a sex worker accused him of choking her during sex near the strip. He claimed it was self-defense, and without sufficient evidence, the case went cold. Ridgway was even subjected to a polygraph test in 1984, which he passed, further complicating the investigation. Despite these setbacks, the task force remained determined. They brought in psychological profilers who helped develop a picture of the killer, an organized offender, likely with a deep-seated hatred for women, particularly sex workers. This profile suggested the killer was methodical, taking time to plan his crimes and cover his tracks meticulously. In a move that seemed straight out of a crime thriller, the task force sought help from an unexpected source: Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious serial killers. Bundy, then on death row in Florida, offered his insights into the mind of the Green River Killer. His advice was both chilling and invaluable. Bundy suggested that the killer might revisit his victims' bodies to relive the thrill of the murders. He also predicted that the killer would continue to escalate his crimes as long as he remained uncaught. Bundy's predictions gave the investigators a new angle to explore. They began staking out locations where bodies had been found, hoping to catch the killer returning to the scene. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the task force continued to gather evidence, but the Green River Killer remained elusive. The breakthrough came in the early 2000s with advancements in DNA technology. Samples collected from the victims were re-examined using new techniques, and finally, a match was found. In 2001, DNA from 3 of the victims matched a saliva sample taken from Gary Ridgway during one of the early investigations. This match was the evidence the task force needed to finally make an arrest. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was taken into custody as he was leaving his job at Kenworth Truck Company. Following his arrest, Ridgway initially maintained his innocence. However, faced with the overwhelming DNA evidence, he eventually confessed to killing 48 women, although he claimed the actual number was closer to 80. His confessions were cold and emotionless, describing each murder with chilling detachment. Ridgway's detailed confessions revealed the full extent of his depravity. He recounted how he would engage in sex with his victims, strangle them, and then dispose of their bodies in remote locations. He also admitted to returning to the bodies to perform necrophilia, a fact that aligned with Bundy's earlier predictions. The arrest and confession of Gary Ridgway brought a sense of relief to the community, but it also opened old wounds for the victims' families. The task force had finally succeeded in capturing one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history, but the emotional scars left by his crimes would never fully heal. Ridgway's small stature and unassuming appearance worked to his advantage. He would gain the trust of his victims by showing them pictures of his son, or talking about his family. This sense of security made it easier for him to lure them into his truck, where he would then overpower and strangle them. In 2003, Ridgway was sentenced to 48 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, one for each of the 48 confirmed murders. The courtroom was filled with the families of his victims, who had waited years for this moment. They listened as Ridgway pled guilty to each charge, his voice emotionless and detached. During the sentencing, family members were given the opportunity to address Ridgway directly. Their statements were heart-wrenching, filled with expressions of grief, anger, and, for some, forgiveness. One father said, "You took from me my firstborn child. May her soul and the soul of the other victims rest in peace." Another family member expressed a desire for Ridgway to understand the pain he caused, saying, "I can only hope someone gets the opportunity to choke you unconscious so you can live through the horror that you put our daughters through." The story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, is one of the most chilling and haunting in American criminal history. For 19 years, Ridgway evaded capture, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. His ability to lead a double life, appearing as a harmless, ordinary man while committing heinous crimes, is a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk beneath the surface.